HOA, Karen tried to force me into her lake HOA. She had no idea I owned the entire lake. She came to my door that morning, clipboard in hand, smiling like a queen inspecting her kingdom. She said I needed permission to sit on my own dock, that I had to follow her lake rules, or face consequences. But what she didn't know was that every ripple of that lake, every inch of that water, already belonged to me. And when she tried to take it, I decided to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. Hey everyone, welcome back to HOA Secrets Uncovered. I'm Daniel. I live in a quiet lakeside neighborhood just outside Cedar Falls. I'm not a troublemaker, not the type to start drama. I moved here to fish, relax, and escape the city noise. But peace doesn't last long when there's an HOA president named Karen, and she thinks she owns everything the sun touches. So here's what happened. The story of how one petty HOA president tried to take my lake and ended up drowning in her own rules. So here's what happened. The story of how one petty HOA president tried to take my lake and ended up drowning in her own rules. I was still unpacking boxes when she came to my door, clipboard in hand, smiling like she owned the sun above the water. Her name was Karen. Everyone called her Karen like it was a title. She lived 3 houses down in a neat white house with shutters and a flag that never drooped. She was always at the meetings, always first to speak, always last to leave. I opened the door with a mug in my hand, coffee cooling inside. She stepped onto my porch like she had permission to be there. "Good morning," she said, her smile wide but her eyes hard. She asked me to join the lake HOA, as if that was the most natural thing in the world. She said all the houses on this side of the lake had to follow the HOA rules. No exceptions. She read from her little book like it was scripture. I listened. Polite at first, I told her I had not signed anything, that I bought the property with my name on the deed. Her smile did not change. She tilted her head like I had missed some fine point. "You must join," she said, voice soft but firm. "You must follow the rules, or there will be consequences." Her words sat on my porch like a cold wind. I thought it was small-town drama at first, a neighbor who liked to boss people around. So I laughed a little, tried to be calm, tried to show I was not bothered. She left a stack of papers in my hand, a printed list of lake rules with her name at the bottom. I put them on the kitchen table and told myself I would look later. That night I stood on my dock and watched the sun melt into the water. The lake was quiet like an old secret, just the sound of a few frogs and the slow breath of the trees. I thought about the papers on my table, the woman who thought she could tell me what to do on my own land. I had saved for years to buy that house, to have a place where I could be alone and hear only the wind. I had not moved out here to argue with a clipboard warrior. The next morning things felt different, like a game that had already begun. A bright yellow paper was taped to my gate. Violation notice printed in bold letters. Too many chairs on the deck, it said. Fence too high. Grass not uniform. I read it and felt a flush in my neck. How could someone tell me about my own yard? I found more papers the same week, on my mailbox, on the trunk of my car, under the mat. Each one had the same neat signature at the bottom. Karen, HOA president. People started looking at me like I had done something wrong. Neighbors I hardly knew waved politely from across the street and then looked away. I could feel the watchful eyes of the cul-de-sac, like a slow heat over everything. I wanted to shout that the lake belonged to me, that every ripple had my name under it, but I kept quiet. I had not planned for drama on day one. An old man named Frank came to my porch the very next day. He lived in a house that leaned a little to the left. He had a dog that always chased his shadow and a voice like paper that had been read too many times. He sat on my stoop and told me stories about Karen, not as gossip but as truth you learned in small-town school. He told me she fined a single mother for a tiny mailbox too high by an inch. He told me she made a veteran repaint his house 3 times because the color was not in the code. He said people tried to fight her before. They burned money on legal fees and lost neighbors. "You should be careful," he said, tapping his cigarette in a broken ashtray. "People who cross her lose more than a paper fine." I nodded because I wanted to be polite, because I did not know what crossing her really meant. But inside, I felt a small flare, a spark that liked a woman who raised a voice against someone small and cruel. The next time I saw Karen, she stood by the lake at the edge of her dock, hands on her hips like she owned the horizon. She was talking to another neighbor, words soft and dangerous as smoke. When she saw me, she waved and the smile slid back on like a mask. She talked about rules and safety and community and the way the lake should be managed for everyone. Her words were full of good intentions like a sermon on a sunny porch. I watched her and felt something that was part anger and part disbelief. I watched the woman who thought she could sign papers and make the law ache hers. I remembered the look in her eyes when she told me to join the HOA, that quiet hunger for control. For the first time, I wondered how she had gotten so much power in a place of cheap fences and small lawns. I went to my desk and pulled out the deed to my property, the paper with my name in black ink. I read it twice to be sure my eyes were not playing tricks on me. It said my name, and then the edge of the lake, and then more words that felt like keys. I felt a strange calm settle into my chest like a deep breath after a long run. This was mine, legally mine, not a rumor, not a local myth. Still, having a piece of paper did not stop a woman with a clipboard from trying to rewrite what the world should look like. It did not stop rumors or whispers or the steady drip of paperwork on my porch. I started to see the small ways power lived in the neighborhood, the way she would call a meeting and the way the lawn chairs would fill like obedient notes in a song. Power here was not loud all the time. It was a careful small thing, a smile at the right moment, a nod at the meeting when the camera was off. That week the community posted a public meeting on the HOA board by the mailbox. A neat little flyer that said, "Lake Use Regulations," and a time and place. Her name was printed at the bottom like a stamp of authority. I felt the tug of curiosity and caution at the same time. I wanted to know what she planned, and also did not want to walk into a room full of judges. On the day of the meeting, I walked past my own gate and felt like an actor stepping onto a stage I did not know the lines for. Neighbors filled folding chairs under an old maple tree. Some faces hopeful and some faces tired. Karen stood in front with a clipboard and a smile, and a voice trained to sound reasonable. She spoke about docks and fishing and insurance and safety, as if those words were cords to wrap the lake in a neat package. When she turned to look at me, I could see she felt certain she had me boxed like a shape that fit in a law book. But I had a secret she did not expect, a quiet truth that could not be sealed with a rubber stamp, and I could feel the moment coming when the shape of the neighborhood would change because of that truth. The letter came 3 days after that meeting. Thick white envelope, gold HOA seal on top. My name printed too neatly, like it was written by someone smiling while sharpening a knife. I opened it slowly. Inside was a list of violations. Again, too many chairs on the deck, unapproved dock, unauthorized water structure, whatever that meant, and at the bottom, a bold line in red ink. Immediate action required. Join the lake HOA or face legal proceedings. I stared at the words for a long time, outside the window. The lake shimmered quiet under morning light. Birds didn't know about paperwork. They just flew wherever they pleased. And yet somehow, a woman with a clipboard thought she could own a lake that evening. I saw her again, Karen, standing near the edge of her driveway, talking to another neighbor. She looked calm, too calm, like someone who already believed she'd won. When she noticed me, her smile spread slow, lazy, confident. I didn't wave back. Later that night, I walked down to the dock. The wood creaked under my steps. The moon painted a silver line across the water. I sat down and stared at the reflection of my porch light rippling across the surface. That lake was more than just property. It was peace. Freedom. The thing I'd worked for my whole life. But peace doesn't survive long when someone like Karen wants control. The next morning, she came again, same clipboard, same tight smile. "Daniel," she said softly, "I really don't want this to get ugly. But rules are rules." I asked her what rules said she could tell me how to live. She ignored the question. She just tapped the paper with her red nails and said, "You'll thank me later, once you understand how things work around here." I felt something click inside me then, a quiet decision, cold and steady. She wanted a fight, but I wasn't going to fight her with anger. I was going to fight her with facts. That afternoon I drove to the county records office. It smelled like old paper and dust. The man behind the desk looked like he hadn't smiled since 2002. I asked him for the original lake ownership records. He shuffled through drawers and pulled out a thick folder, the edges yellow. The ink faded but clear enough, and there it was, a map, a line, and my name written where the water began. "Yep," the clerk said, tapping the page. "That whole section's yours. Everything up to the east shore." He looked up at me. "Why? Someone giving you trouble?" I smiled. "Yeah. Just someone who thinks they own what's already mine." I went home lighter, not just because I had proof, but because now I had purpose. I made copies of the documents, folded them neatly, placed them in a folder marked Lake Ownership, Legal. Then I waited 2 days later. Karen called for a community lake safety meeting. The notice was slipped under my door at sunrise. She didn't even knock. It said attendance was mandatory for all lake residents. I laughed so hard I spilled my coffee. That evening I walked down to the common area near the water. Everyone was there, neighbors sitting in neat rows of folding chairs. Karen stood in front like a queen addressing her court, clipboard ready, voice sweet as sugar. She started listing new lake rules. Boats must be approved by the board. No fishing after 6 p.m. No private events without written HOA consent. Every line she read made my hands tighter around the folder I carried. When she finished, she smiled again and said, "Any questions?" I raised my hand. Her smile faltered just a little. "Yes. Daniel?" I stood up, walked to the front. The lake behind her shimmered in the fading light. Perfect timing. I opened the folder and spoke slowly. "Karen, you said these rules apply to all lake property owners, right?" She nodded. I held up the papers. "Then I suppose you'll want to update your list, because this lake, isn't HOA property." The crowd shifted. A few whispers. A few gasps. Karen blinked, the smile freezing halfway. "What are you talking about?" she said. I handed her a copy of the deed. She looked down, her eyes darting across the lines. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then her face changed. The color drained like spilled paint. The neighbors leaned in. Someone whispered, "Wait, he owns the lake?" Someone else said, "That can't be right." I said nothing. I just stood there, calm, watching her read every word. Finally she looked up. "That's not possible. The lake belongs to the HOA." "No," I interrupted softly. "It belongs to me." The silence after that felt like thunder. Even the ducks stopped moving. Karen tried to speak again. Something about reviewing records, contacting her lawyer. But her voice cracked in the middle. She turned to the crowd, tried to smile again, but it looked broken this time. I didn't stay much longer. I just said, "Meeting's over," and walked back toward my dock. Behind me, the whispers grew louder. Her name carried through them like ripples on the water. The next few days were quiet. too quiet. No notes, no warnings, no letters on my door. But peace, after a storm, always feels suspicious. I knew she wouldn't give up that easily. I started noticing strange things. A car parked near the trees at odd hours. The sound of footsteps near my dock at night. Once I found a small camera hidden under a bush near the waterline. I knew whose hands it came from. I called the local police. They came. Looked around. Took notes. They didn't say much, but one of them whispered, "She's been calling us about you too. Says you're trespassing on her HOA lake." I almost laughed, but something inside me turned colder instead. That night, I sat on the edge of the dock again. The air smelled like rain and pine. The moon floated low and pale. I could hear her house lights flick on across the water, a yellow glow staring back like an eye that never slept. I thought about how far people go for control, how a few rules on paper can twist into obsession, how power turns even calm smiles into weapons. I realized Karen didn't care about the lake. She cared about winning. She needed to be right. Even if it meant rewriting truth itself, I decided then. If she wanted a war of papers and laws, she would get one, but I'd play by her rules, to the letter, because sometimes the best revenge isn't breaking the rules, it's following them perfectly, until they break themselves. The rain started the next morning, soft at first, then sharp against the windows like tiny fists, the kind of rain that makes you stay inside and think too much. I made coffee, looked out across the lake. The water rippled like it was whispering secrets. Everything looked peaceful again, too peaceful, but peace in this neighborhood never lasted long. By noon, I heard a knock. 3 slow taps. Polite but firm, I opened the door. And there she was again, Karen, hair perfectly pinned, lips pressed tight. No smile this time, only that cold confidence that comes from people who believe they can't lose. She didn't wait to be invited in. She stepped halfway through my door and said, "Daniel, we've received complaints about your dock." "My dock?" I asked. "It's unsafe," she said flatly. "Unapproved structure built without HOA inspection." I took a slow sip of coffee and smiled. "Karen, you do realize that dock is sitting on my private lake, right?" Her eyes twitched just slightly. She didn't like that word. Private. She handed me a new paper. "Official notice of violation," it said in bold, more empty threats dressed up as legal letters. Then she added something that made my stomach tighten. "The board will be holding an emergency meeting about your property this week. Attendance is expected." I asked her if this board knew that the lake wasn't HOA property. She didn't answer. She just turned and walked away under her umbrella, calm as a storm that hadn't hit yet. That night I couldn't sleep. Rain pounded on the roof. The wind howled. I kept thinking about that emergency meeting and what kind of tricks she might pull next. The next morning I visited Frank, the old man from across the street. He was sitting on his porch, feeding his dog bits of toast. He smiled when he saw me. "You've stirred the nest, son," he said. He told me the board members were already talking, whispering that I'd threatened the HOA, that I was refusing community cooperation. Typical Karen tactics. Turn truth into rumor and rumor into power. Frank shook his head slowly. "She's dangerous in her own way," he said. "She knows how to use people's fear. She makes them believe they're safer if they just listen to her." He looked at me hard. "Be careful, Daniel. She's not going to stop until she gets what she wants." I thanked him, but inside I was done being careful. If she wanted to play dirty, fine, but I'd be cleaner, smarter, and louder when it mattered most. The emergency meeting was set for Friday evening. Held at the community clubhouse by the North Shore. I arrived 5 minutes early, the parking lot already full of SUVs and pickup trucks. When I stepped inside, the air felt thick Everyone was already seated. Karen stood in front of a long table with 3 other board members, all wearing that same smug look of suburban authority. "Mr. Daniel," she said sweetly, "we're so glad you could join us." I nodded and sat near the back. She began with her usual speech about unity, safety, order. Then she started showing photos of my property on a projector, pictures taken from angles only someone trespassing could get, the dock, my yard, even the side of my house. "This structure," she said, pointing at my dock, "poses a danger to the community. It blocks shared access to the lake and violates HOA guidelines." I stood slowly. "Karen," I said evenly, "there is no shared access. The lake is privately owned, by me." The room went silent. All eyes turned toward me. I pulled a folder from my bag and held up the papers. Again, the deed, the county seal, everything. "You can't find me, you can't inspect me, and you definitely can't make rules for water that isn't yours." Karen laughed, a dry, nervous laugh that cracked at the edges. "Let's not get dramatic, Daniel," she said. "These documents can be very confusing. The HOA has jurisdiction over all properties adjacent to the lake." "Then maybe," I said, walking closer, "you should read the entire document instead of the parts that make you feel powerful." I handed her a copy. She hesitated before taking it. Everyone watched as she flipped through the pages. Her face paled again, just like Tepuon. Last time, one of the board members leaned over to whisper to her. The whispering turned into quiet arguing. Then she slammed the papers down on the table. "This will be reviewed by our legal department," she said. "Until then, you're still required to comply with HOA standards." I smiled. "Sure," I said calmly. "And I'll let the county handle the trespassing charges for whoever took those photos of my dock." A few gasps filled the room. Karen froze. I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. But as the door closed behind me, I could hear her voice rise. Sharp, panicked, desperate. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled fresh, new, like the world had just hit reset. But something inside me knew it wasn't over. That night, I found another letter in my mailbox. No HOA logo this time, just a plain envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words written in red marker. No signature, no address, just threat. I stood there under the porch light, the words glowing in my hand, and for the first time I felt it. Not anger, not fear, but curiosity. How far was she willing to go? How deep did her control reach in this small, quiet town? I looked out toward the water. The moon hung low again, the reflection breaking softly on my dock, my lake, my rules, my fight. And I couldn't help but smile, because if she wanted to turn this into a game, I had just decided to win. The sun came back the next morning. Too bright, too calm. Like the world was pretending nothing had happened, but I could still see the red letters in my mind. The paper sat on my kitchen table, curling at the edges. No signature, no name. But I didn't need one. I could feel her handwriting in those words, the same sharpness as her voice, the same need for control. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak in the house felt like footsteps. Every flicker of light on the lake looked like movement. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but something in my gut whispered otherwise. By noon, I saw her again. Karen, walking across the street with a clipboard and fake smile. She stopped by my mailbox, pretending to check the community post. But her eyes, they never left my porch. I stepped outside. She straightened up, smiled wide, and said, "Oh, Daniel, didn't see you there. Lovely morning, isn't it?" I stared at her. "Lovely," I said. "Perfect day for minding your own business." Her smile cracked for a second, then came back sharper than before. "Careful," she said softly. "Some people in this neighborhood don't like troublemakers." She turned and walked away. But that word, troublemaker, stuck in my head all day. That afternoon, I noticed something new. A small drone hovering over my backyard, just high enough to pretend it wasn't spying, just low enough for me to see the tiny red light blinking under it. I grabbed my binoculars, and sure enough, the drone flew back toward Karen's property. I could see her silhouette through the window, watching it return like a proud pet. That was it. No more quiet. I called the sheriff's office, told them someone was harassing me with a drone. The deputy showed up an hour later. He was polite, calm, but when I told him who I suspected, he sighed and rubbed his temples. "Karen?" he said. I nodded. Well, let's just say you're not the first to call." He took a report, promised to talk to her, and left. I knew what that meant. He'd knock, she'd smile, she'd deny everything, and the whole thing would dissolve into polite nothing, so I decided to handle it differently. That evening, I installed 2 motion lights near the dock, high-powered ones that lit up the whole lakefront like a stage. If anyone tried to sneak close again, they'd glow like a spotlighted actor. Then I placed a small camera of my own, facing her direction, hidden behind the edge of a planter. By midnight, the lights flicked on. Someone was there. A shadow. Tall, moving slowly near the water. Then came the splash, quick and sharp, like something being thrown in when I checked the camera later. I saw her, Karen, standing at the edge of the lake, throwing what looked like papers into the water. I paused the video, zoomed in. They were envelopes, like the ones she used for HOA notices. The next morning I walked down to the dock. The lake was calm again, but near the shore, half-soaked, I found one of the envelopes. The ink had bled, but I could still read part of it. Violation notice. Dock structure. Non-compliant. She had been trying to dump evidence, erase her little paper trail. I took photos, saved everything, then printed a copy of the footage and sealed it in an envelope of my own, labeled it insurance. Later that week, another community email arrived. Mandatory HOA inspection for all lakefront homes, it said. Scheduled for Saturday morning, she was still trying to assert control, still pretending her rules mattered. Saturday came. I stood on my porch with coffee, waiting. Sure enough, here came Karen, 3 people behind her. Clipboard crew. They wore reflective vests like they were inspecting a bridge instead of backyards. "Good morning, Daniel," she said sweetly. "We're here to inspect your dock and shoreline access." I smiled. "Sure," I said. "But before you start, let me show you something." I pulled out my phone, played the footage of her throwing papers into the lake. The silence that followed was almost musical. Her eyes went wide. The other inspectors shifted awkwardly. I could see her thinking, searching for some excuse. "That's not what it looks like," she finally said. I tilted my head. "Oh, really? Because it looks exactly like HOA tampering. You do know destroying official notices is a federal offense, right?" Her face went pale. She stammered something about misunderstanding and wet documents, then quickly ended the inspection. The next day, I received an apology letter, short, formal, fake, signed by the HOA board. Not by her, but I knew. It wasn't over. She wouldn't back off so easily. People like her never do. They just switched tactics. For the next few days, everything seemed quiet. No notes, no drones, no letters. Then one evening, while I was grilling on the deck, I noticed movement by the trees. Not Karen, someone else. A man in a dark jacket carrying a clipboard and taking photos of my property. When I shouted, he ran. No logo, no name badge, just gone. The next morning, I went to the town hall again, showed them the video, filed another report. The clerk leaned close and said, "Sir, did you know the HOA is trying to claim maintenance rights over your lake? They filed a request last week." My stomach dropped. Maintenance rights. That meant she was trying to get legal control. Through paperwork, quiet war had become open battle. I went home that night and laid everything out on the table, every letter, every recording, every photo, And right in the middle, the deed, the one thing that made her powerless. I stared at it for a long time, then smiled slowly. If she wanted to fight in court, I was ready. But I wasn't just going to defend. I was going to expose her. Because sometimes the best way to stop a bully is to let everyone see who they really are when the mask cracks. It started with a knock. Soft at first, then louder, steady. Like whoever was behind that door wanted me to feel the rhythm in my bones. I opened it slowly. 2 men stood there, suits, sunglasses, the kind that don't blink even when the sun hits their face. "Mr. Daniel Carter?" one of them asked. "Yeah," I said cautiously. He handed me a brown envelope, thick, official-looking. "Consider yourself served," he said flatly. And just like that, they were gone. I tore it open right there on the porch. Inside, court papers. Apparently, I was being sued for unauthorized construction, environmental disturbance, and community non-compliance. I almost laughed. Unauthorized construction? I built that dock with my own hands, on my own land. Environmental disturbance? My lake was cleaner than their entire street combined. But community non-compliance. That was Karen's favorite word. I could almost hear her voice dripping off the page. Still, one thing bothered me more than anything. The claim was stamped and filed under the HOA's new Lake Maintenance Authority. She'd done it. She'd found a loophole. I sat down, staring at the lake. It looked calm. Too calm. Behind that mirror of water, a storm was coming. I called my lawyer friend Mark, an old college buddy who now specialized in property law. He listened quietly, then said, "Daniel, if she got that claim approved, she's trying to establish jurisdiction. If that happens, she can fine you, restrict access, even gate the lake." I clenched my fist. "She's trying to take the lake away from me." Mark sighed. "You'll need proof that you own it outright. And that she's been overstepping her authority. Do you have documentation?" "Every single page," I said. "Good," he replied. "Then it's time to make things public." That night, I did something bold. I uploaded the footage of Karen throwing HOA letters into the lake, the one she thought I'd keep hidden, to a private Facebook group called Life in Lakeview. It was where the residents shared photos of ducks and sunset barbecues. Within hours, it exploded. People started commenting, "Wait, she's not supposed to be doing that. I got fined by her last year for a mailbox violation. She forged my inspection notice, too." By midnight, the post had hundreds of reactions. Karen must have seen it because the next morning, all hell broke loose. A black SUV parked across from my house. Karen stepped out, sunglasses on, lips tight, phone in hand. She didn't knock, didn't yell. She just stood there, staring. A minute later, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. When I answered, her voice came through, low and controlled. "You made a mistake, Daniel." "Posting the truth?" I said. She chuckled. "You think this is about truth? This is about order. Without people like me, this community would fall apart." I looked out the window at her, still standing by her car. "Order?" I said. "You mean control." "Call it what you want," she replied coldly. "But I always win." Then she hung up. I stared at my reflection in the window, the lake behind me shimmering like liquid silver. Maybe she had always won before, but not this time. That same day, the HOA meeting notice was taped to every mailbox. Emergency session. Topic: addressing community defamation and unauthorized social media posts. I knew exactly what that meant. They were coming for me. When I arrived at the meeting, the hall was already full, dozens of residents whispering, glaring, confused. Karen stood at the front, gavel in hand like she owned the place. She began her speech with a sickly sweet tone. "Neighbors, we've all seen the unfortunate video circulating online. It's been doctored, of course." Gasps, murmurs. "Defamation of our HOA leadership cannot be tolerated," she continued. "Therefore, we're voting tonight to remove Mr. Carter's lake privileges until the matter is resolved." I raised my hand. "You can't take away what isn't yours." She smiled condescendingly. "Actually, Daniel, we can." That's when I pulled out my phone and connected it to the projector. On the screen appeared a high-resolution scan of the lake ownership deed. My name, my signature, the date, the boundaries, the legal description. Gasps filled the room. Karen froze, her face drained of color. I looked right at her and said, "You're trespassing every time you touch that lake, Karen. You, your drones, your inspectors, every single one of you." Someone in the back yelled, "Is that true?" Another voice said, "You told us the HOA owned it." The murmurs turned into arguments. Karen slammed the gavel, shouting for order, but no one listened. Her power, that invisible fear she used to control people, was dissolving in real time. I walked out before it got ugly. The cold night air hit me, and for the first time in weeks I smiled, but the calm didn't last. The next morning, my mailbox was gone, ripped clean out of the ground, a dead fish nailed to the post where it used to stand. No note, no signature, just a message. And then came the letter in red ink slipped under my door. "You should have stayed quiet." I stared at those words for a long time. Was she threatening me? Or was someone else trying to scare me away from the fight? Because by now it didn't feel like just Karen anymore. There were eyes on me I didn't recognize. Cars I'd never seen before parked too long outside my house. And at night, sometimes, I swear I could hear faint footsteps near the dock. The kind that stop the moment you listen too hard. It started again that night. The sound I couldn't ignore anymore. Soft footsteps, crunching over gravel. Then silence, then a splash. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the flashlight by my nightstand. The clock said 2:47 a.m. The beam cut through the fog as I stepped outside. The lake looked peaceful, too peaceful, but the ripples said otherwise. Someone had been there. Or something. I followed the sound toward the dock. That old wooden path creaked under my feet. The air smelled like wet leaves and gasoline. And then I saw it, a small boat, unmarked, floating halfway across the lake. Its rope cut loose, drifting slowly toward the far bank. No one should have been out there at this hour, especially not after the chaos at the HOA meeting. I took a step closer. That's when I noticed something glinting under the dock. A piece of metal, bent, slick with mud. I knelt down and pulled it free. It was part of a camera lens. Someone had been watching me. My stomach twisted. I scanned the shorelines with my light, but all I could see were dark outlines of houses, windows glowing faintly in the mischies. Was Karen behind one of them right now, smiling, watching? I stayed out there until the sun started to rise. Then I went back inside, brewed a strong coffee, and sat by the window. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. By noon, I called Mark again. "Told you it wasn't just about the lawsuit," I said. He sighed. "Karen's playing dirty, but you've got leverage now. If you can prove she's using HOA funds for this, then she's done," I said. He paused. "Exactly. But you'll need hard evidence." So that afternoon, I went on a walk. Not the kind for fresh air, but for digging secrets. Literally. See, every HOA board has its weaknesses. Karen's? Paper trails. Behind the community hall near the storage shed, there was an old recycling bin labeled Archive. I'd seen her toss files there before, probably thinking no one cared about old records. I waited until dusk, when most neighbors were inside. Then I slipped behind the shed, heart thumping, and popped the lid. Inside were hundreds of papers, invoices, letters, payment slips. But one folder caught my eye, stamped with the HOA seal. Lake Maintenance Confidential. I flipped it open. Inside were receipts, not for cleaning supplies or landscaping, but for private security, drone equipment, and monitoring services. I read one line twice. Surveillance invoice, subject, Daniel Carter residence, approved by K. Harlow. Karen's full name, her signature, her initials. My blood ran cold. She wasn't just harassing me, she was paying people to spy on me. With HOA funds, I stuffed the folder under my jacket and left before anyone saw me. When I got home, I called Mark again. "This is it," I told him, voice shaking with adrenaline. "She's finished." He paused, then said, "Careful, Daniel. If she realizes you have that, she'll panic, and desperate people do stupid things." He was right, because that night it got worse. I was sitting on the couch, lights off, just staring at that folder when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Before I could respond, headlights flashed across my window, then a loud bang. Something hit the side of the house. I rushed out the front door, but whoever it was gone. Only a rock lay on the grass, wrapped in paper, scrawled across it, in red marker. I didn't sleep that night, didn't even close my eyes. I sat by the window, watching the lake, waiting for her next move. The next morning, Karen wasn't at her usual spot on the cul-de-sac. No clipboard, no morning patrol, no smug smile. Instead, 2 police cruisers were parked outside her house, neighbors whispering on the sidewalk. Something had happened. I walked over slowly, pretending to check my mail. An officer stopped me. "Sir, please stay back," he said firmly. "What's going on?" I asked. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Someone broke into a property last night. Messy scene. We're investigating." My heart skipped last night. He didn't say much else, but I could see them pulling out bags of papers, computer parts, even a drone from her garage. It hit me then. She'd been planning something bigger than harassment, and now someone had beaten her to it. Later that day, I got a call from an unknown number again, but this time it wasn't a threat. It was a shaky voice. One of the HOA board members. "Daniel," she whispered, "you didn't hear this from me, but Karen's been under investigation for months. Fraud, property manipulation, even blackmail." I froze. Blackmail? She's been taking money from homeowners to protect them from violations she created herself. The police found proof. My hand trembled around the phone. All this time I thought she was just power hungry, but she was worse. She was dangerous. That night, I walked back down to the dock. The moonlight shimmered across the water. The lake looked peaceful again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, because as I looked down into the reflection of the lake, I saw something small floating near the edge. It was a phone case, pink, with the initials KH scratched into the back. Karen's phone. I picked it up slowly. The screen cracked, but still flickering faintly. A video file was open. The title read, "Insurance Footage. Lake Ownership Meeting." I hesitated, then pressed play. The video started blurry. Then it focused on me, standing in that same meeting room, showing the deed on the screen. But behind me, something else appeared. A shadow, moving, watching. And then the voice on the video said something I'll never forget. My breath caught in my throat. The video cut to black. Those words haunted me. I replayed the video again and again. The shadow behind me, the voice that wasn't Karen's, deeper, colder, certain. Karen was evil, sure, but this, This felt bigger. I sat on my porch as the fog rolled over the water, the pink phone still in my hand, battery dying, screen flickering, like it wanted to give up before I could learn too much. I plugged it in, waited. And when it powered on, I opened the message folder. Hundreds of texts. Some were just HOA reminders, but others. They were between Karen and someone listed as LC. The messages were short, coded, businesslike. LC. Keep pressure on him, he'll break soon. Karen. He's not biting. Might need legal action. LC. Do it. The board needs the deed. The board needs the deed. I froze. Was this all about the lake? Or something else entirely? I scrolled further. One last message, sent just an hour before that supposed break-in at her house. Karen. I have the copy. If he finds out, we're done. LC. Handle it. Handle it. That phrase felt like a bullet, and I realized Karen hadn't been attacked. She'd been silenced. I took a deep breath and called Mark again. Something's wrong, I said. I think Karen was working for someone else. He sounded wary. Who? I don't know yet. Someone called LC. There was silence on the line for a moment. Then he said quietly, Daniel, check your deed again. That stopped me cold. What do you mean? Just check the fine print, bottom of the page, the recording date. I pulled the deed from my drawer, ran my finger along the edge of the page, and there it was, a note I'd never noticed before. My heart dropped. LC wasn't a person. It was a company, and if what I was reading was right, they technically co-owned a fraction of the lake, the part that bordered the HOA's land, which meant Karen might have been telling the truth about jurisdiction, at least a piece of it. I sat there staring at the document, my name printed proudly at the top, but now it looked more like a trap than ownership. Who was behind LC? Why would they want full control of a lake that barely saw more than a few fishing boats a week? Then I remembered something Karen had said at that HOA meeting, almost like a slip of the tongue. This community is about to grow, beyond what you can imagine. Development. That was the word she used. I opened my laptop and searched Lakeview Development Corporation, and there it was. The company had filed permits for a luxury marina expansion months ago, right on my side of the lake. It wasn't about rules or dues. It was about money. Karen was just the pawn. I was the obstacle. I sat back, exhaling slowly. The pieces started falling into place. The surveillance, the threats, the lawsuit. They weren't trying to control me. They were trying to push me out. Mark called again later that night. Daniel, if this is what I think it is, you're in danger, he said. Developers don't play fair. Too late for that, I muttered. And because at that exact moment, headlights flashed outside again, same SUV, same tinted windows, engine running this time. I grabbed my phone and recorded everything. The light stayed on me for almost a minute, then drove off slowly into the night. The next morning, I took the folder, Karen's phone, and the deed to the county office. I filed an official claim, and I left copies of everything with the sheriff. When I got back home, the lake was quiet again, almost too quiet, not a ripple, not a bird. Then, out of nowhere, a gust of wind hit the dock, and I noticed something sticking out between the boards, like a piece of paper wedged by the waves. I bent down and pulled it free. It was soaked but still readable, a typed letter, unsigned. You were never supposed to buy this land, Daniel. It wasn't in the plan. Sell while you still can. The paper slipped from my hands, drifted back into the water, and I just stood there, staring at my reflection. The lake didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like it was watching me. That evening, Mark texted me. Good news. County's launching a full audit on Lakeview Corp. Your evidence started something. I should have felt relief, but I didn't. because right after that message, another one came through. No number, no name. You think this ends with Karen? The phone slipped from my hand. I looked out toward the lake, and for a second, just a second, I thought I saw someone standing on the far bank, still, watching. The fog swallowed them whole before I could blink. Now I sit here on my porch every night, waiting for the next move. The lake glows silver under the moon, beautiful, silent, dangerous. Sometimes I wonder if Karen was just another victim. Maybe she knew too much. Maybe she tried to stop it too late. And every night when the wind moves just right, I swear I can still hear her voice whisper across the water. You shouldn't have stayed to Dim Daniel. But I'm not leaving, not yet, because I know there's still one name missing from the files, one person above LC, the real owner of the lake. And until I find them, this story isn't over.